On February 19, 1985, at Taiwan International Airport, a wide-body, double-deck, four-engine aircraft operated by China Airlines was being loaded with baggage and cargo for a very long flight to the United States. The flight, designated Col 006, was operated by China Airlines and scheduled to travel from Taiwan to Los Angeles. The route covered a distance of 11,100 kilometers with an estimated flight time of 11 hours and 30 minutes. The captain was Ming Wenho, 55 years old. He had accumulated 15,500 flight hours, including 3,748 hours on the Boeing 747. A highly experienced pilot, he had previously served as a fighter pilot in the China Air Force before joining China Airlines. With more than 30 years in aviation, he was known as a meticulous professional who was always willing to help younger pilots. The first officer was Zhu Yihui Chang, 53 years old. He had 7,700 flight hours, 4,453 of which were on the Boeing 747. Like the captain, he had also been a military pilot in the China Air Force before transitioning to civil aviation. He was one of the airline's outstanding pilots, having received a full scholarship to train at a prestigious flight school in the United States. The flight engineer was Guo Bingwei, 55 years old, with 15,500 flight hours of experience. In addition, 2 relief pilots were known to rotate duties during the flight, which was expected to last over 10 hours. There were 274 people on board, including 251 passengers and 23 crew members. The aircraft was a Boeing 747's BEF registration number N4522. It was a relatively new aircraft delivered by Boeing to China Airlines in June 1982. After nearly 3 years of service, the aircraft had accumulated approximately 10,100 flight hours. China Airlines had selected the Boeing 747 for long-haul operations to improve passenger comfort while maximizing profitability. However, 4 days earlier, during 2 previous flights, serious issues had occurred when the aircraft was flying above 40,000 feet. Engine number 4 had repeatedly shut down at altitudes above 40,000 feet. To resolve the problem, pilots had been forced to descend to lower altitudes to restart the engine. The issue was reported to China Airlines for maintenance. Instead of removing the engine for a detailed inspection, maintenance personnel only replaced several basic components, such as fuel filters and drainage valves. No test flight was conducted, and the aircraft was returned to passenger service immediately afterward. In fact, the underlying problem with engine number 4 had not been fully resolved. After approximately 10 hours of flight, Col 006 was about 300 miles from Los Angeles. The aircraft was cruising at an altitude of 41,000 feet, 12,500 meters, to conserve fuel and achieve maximum speed. At that moment, the captain and the flight engineer were monitoring the aircraft while the 2 relief pilots were resting on the upper deck. The flight was nearing its end, with just over an hour remaining. A few minutes later, the pilots received information indicating severe turbulence ahead. The captain instructed all passengers to fasten their seatbelts, warning that the aircraft might experience significant shaking as a precaution to prevent turbulence-related ignition. Large aircraft like the Boeing 747 are generally capable of handling turbulence well, thanks to their large wingspan, which helps maintain stability. However, while passing through the turbulent area, another issue drew the flight engineer's attention: engine number 4. It was producing less power than the other 3 engines. The flight engineer attempted to adjust the throttle of engine number 4, hoping the problem could be corrected instead. The situation worsened. The engine's power continued to decrease, becoming significantly weaker than the remaining engines. A few minutes later, engine number 4 completely flamed out, with its power dropping to 0. Because engine number 4 was mounted on the outermost position of the right wing. The loss of this engine caused the aircraft to roll sharply to the right. In response, the autopilot quickly applied left control input to counteract the roll. All attempts to restart the engine failed. The crew then made the decision to shut off the fuel supply to engine number 4, isolating it from the rest of the aircraft's systems. After losing full thrust from one engine, the Boeing 747 could no longer safely maintain an altitude of 41,000 feet at an acceptable airspeed. At this moment, the captain grew increasingly concerned as the aircraft's airspeed continued to drop. If the speed decreased further, a serious situation was inevitable. The China Airlines Boeing 747 was powered by 4 Pratt & Whitney JAT-90 jet engines, each capable of producing up to 21 tons of thrust. When engine number 4 failed, the aircraft immediately experienced a pneumatic thrust, with the left wing producing significantly more thrust than the right. As a result, the aircraft began to roll gradually to the right. The autopilot immediately commanded left control inputs, adjusting the control surfaces to keep the aircraft flying as straight as possible. However, the autopilot could only maintain directional stability if the pilots avoided increasing the power of the remaining 3 engines too much. As thrust increased, the rightward rolling tendency became even stronger. At this time, the captain was fixated on the airspeed indicator, which continued to decline. He decided to increase the thrust of the remaining 3 engines to maximum power in an attempt to regain airspeed. As thrust increased, so did the aircraft's tendency to roll to the right. Despite the autopilot's efforts, the aircraft continued to bank right because the captain pushed the thrust so high. The 2 engines on the left wing became far more powerful than the single remaining engine on the right wing. Increasing thrust could no longer compensate for the loss of airspeed. The only remaining option was to descend. By this point, the aircraft's bank angle had become significant, yet the captain remained focused on the airspeed indicator and failed to monitor the aircraft's overall attitude. As the speed dropped more rapidly, the captain decided to disconnect the autopilot in order to manually recover airspeed. Disconnecting the autopilot meant that no system was actively maintaining the aircraft's balance. Before the captain could fully take control of the yoke, the aircraft rolled sharply to the right and entered a steep dive. The aircraft descended at an extreme rate. The structural load on the cabin and passengers reached 5 Gs, 5 times Earth's gravity. As the speed exceeded 1,000 kilometers per hour, the landing gear bay doors began to rupture. If altitude was not recovered immediately, the aircraft would have broken apart in midair. At 9,500 feet, the captain finally managed to grasp the control column and began pulling the aircraft out of the dive. He succeeded in arresting the descent and started to regain altitude at around 9,000 feet. Due to the violent descent, the landing gear doors were forced open, unintentionally activating several systems. As a result, the landing gear extended without the pilot's awareness. The captain noticed that the aircraft had become extremely difficult to control. He decided to re-engage the autopilot. Confident that the flight could continue, he requested clearance from air traffic control to climb back to 35,000 feet and proceed to Los Angeles. However, a few minutes later, while passing through 25,000 feet, the flight engineer discovered that one hydraulic system had failed and that the landing gear was still extended. A Boeing 747 is not permitted to fly above 27,000 feet with the landing gear extended, so the crew decided to level off at 25,000 feet. At that altitude, combined with the additional drag from the extended landing gear, the remaining fuel would not be sufficient to reach Los Angeles. The crew therefore decided to divert to San Francisco, unknown to the pilots at the time. Both horizontal stabilizers at the tail of the aircraft had been severely damaged during the dive. The captain sensed that the flight control systems were not functioning properly, but there was no alternative other than to land as soon as possible. China Airlines Flight K006 landed safely in San Francisco. Out of the 274 people on board, 2 passengers were seriously injured. The extreme inertial forces during the dive caused one person to suffer severe muscle tearing in the back, while another sustained serious injuries to the foot. The aircraft was recorded as having fallen from 41,000 feet, 12,500 meters, to 9,500 feet, 2,800 meters, in just 2 minutes. The US National Transportation Safety Board, in cooperation with TN authorities, launched an investigation into the serious incident. The maintenance supervisor responsible for repairing engine number 4 was dismissed for negligence and for failing to properly address the underlying issue. However, the most critical errors were attributed to pilot actions. The captain had become distracted by the airspeed indicator and relied too heavily on the autopilot. As a result, he failed to immediately take full control after disengaging the autopilot, especially while the aircraft was experiencing severe asymmetric thrust. All 5 pilots on the flight crew were dismissed shortly afterward. The aircraft sustained major structural damage, including permanent upper deformation of the wings by 5 centimeters. After extensive repairs, the aircraft returned to service and continued operating for another 24 years before finally being retired in 2009.